Thank you very much. Well, that's a great welcome. I'm stoked to be here, actually. This is the first time I've combined a talk about alchemy with a music gig. Usually it's just one crowd or the other, you know. I don't usually cross the streams. So yeah, this is the first time. It's a real pleasure to be here. And you know, I lived out of the country between 2000 and 2018. I was in England and then America. I lived in Hawaii for 2.5 years. And then I came back to my hometown in wee Newport-on-Tay in Fife. Anyone know Newport? Yeah, so I've come back there and putting my roots down now. And, you know, I want to meet more awake people in my home country. And I knew that I kind of had to write a book if I was going to do that. So, you know, thanks to everyone who's come out tonight and everyone who's read the book. And even if you haven't, as I say, I've got them on sale here tonight. But I'll get cracking with the presentation anyway. I've got lots to share with you. Might be going quite quick, but we'll get some questions in that at the end. Okay, so let's just start with a bit of background then. So, born and raised in Scotland. I was born in 1978. I'm now an independent artist and author, and a husband and father of 3. I went to St Andrews University, got a master's in theoretical physics, and then Surrey University with a PhD in theoretical physics. So at this point, I was 25 years old before I left school. And when I finally left with all these great qualifications, these impressive sounding qualifications, I couldn't get a job. For about 6 months, I was like, you know, writing to employers and recruitment agencies and stuff. And, you know, they were just like, well, you know, it all sounds impressive, but what skills have you got? You know, slowly starting to realize I didn't really have any skills. I had all this knowledge of, you know, abstract mathematics and, you know, deep theoretical physics, but it wasn't really any use in the real world, in the job world. It didn't really seem to have much value. I ended up getting a job working for an IT consultancy company, working for basically banks. And it was not enjoyable. And I spent 5 years doing that and just dreaming of being a self-employed musician, music producer. So I practiced making music on my computer, and eventually in 2010 I quit my job and I just went full-time and just every day just making music and saying yes to every opportunity that came my way. Every time someone invited me to play a show or asked me to teach them music or where, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. And so I did that for 10 years, through till 2020, when it all kind of came to a bit of an abrupt end. But, you know, during that time, I moved to America in 2015 and spent 3 years in Central America and then in Hawaii. And I did a lot of shamanic work during that time, like ayahuasca ceremonies and learning about various different plant medicines with shaman out there. And, you know, this was a real mind-expanding time in my life. I suppose I went through a lot of deprogramming. There's a lot of stuff when you grow up in the UK, there's a lot of stuff you get programmed with, you know, UK-specific indoctrination. And, you know, if you spend 6 months living in the woods in Honduras, a lot of that programming just, like, melts away. It really, like, breaks you out of the matrix, as it were. But, you know, in spite of that, and even, you know, Hawaii was a great place to live, but it is also a very difficult place to live compared to here. You know, it's a young country, as it were, and the elements are very strong there. You're up against big nature, like, a lot of the time. So it was very stressful, and the constant heat all year round is not as appealing as you might think. As a Scotsman, I always thought it'd be great living in Hawaii, you know, with the heat and everything, but, you know, the mosquitoes and the fire ants and the rats and all the storms, oh yeah, it was just too much. So I'm glad to be back in Scotland, in my homeland, and here is where I belong and here's where I'm going to stay. So, yeah, so then 2020 came round, and of course, yeah, my eyes were opened wider than ever in 2020. I mean, I'd say I had a number of awakenings throughout my life, but 2020 was a big one, as I'm sure it was for all of us. So yeah, during those years, it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to continue with my music career the way I had been, and I was like, what am I going to do with myself? I thought, I have to write a book. I have to just be authentic. I just have to say what I need to say. And so I did, and that's why I'm here. So, okay, just quickly, I know some of you read the book already. This is one of the comments from Amazon. It says, "A fool's wisdom is not just a book, it's a transformational experience." And I like this because that's what I was going for. You know, it's not just a book of alchemy, it's an alchemical book. It's designed to take you on a transformational journey as you read it. So this person really seemed to get it. And yeah, but one of the other comments that I thought was really interesting, this guy wrote, "Prospective buyers may be interested to know the book scores an impressive 934 out of 1,000 on David R. Hawkins' map of consciousness model. The author has a fantastic mind for analysis and lives in the real world." It's always a good compliment when someone tells you that. So I hadn't heard of this map of consciousness, but that's it there. I'm going to come back to this at the end, so you don't need to read all that now. But it's a map or a model of human consciousness, and basically he'd run my book through an app which had scanned it and given it this great score, which is right up in the enlightenment level. So I'm really proud of that. But I'll come back to this at the end of the talk and tell you what this means and how we can apply it to our own lives. So, okay, well, why did I call it a fool's wisdom? Well, the fool is a key aspect of the human soul. It's the first card in the tarot deck, the first step on the path to wisdom. And I define the fool as the one who plays, because I'd noticed the fool's the only playful card in the tarot, right? All the rest of them are quite serious, you know, the magician and the devil and everything. There's all like super serious, but the fool is just like, ta-da! You know, and I could kind of relate to that. This idea of like being full of faith, and but lacking higher knowledge. So, yeah, I could relate to this as a musician. I was just living the dream. You know, I was out there, my head held high. I knew nothing of the dangers of the world, but I was determined to live my dream and be a musician. And wear the heart on the sleeve, which I always did. And of course, the fool is depicted with the dog by his side, and the dog is said to represent God, because it's God backwards. And he's got the sun at his back, and about to step off the edge of a cliff. So, and someone wrote to me recently saying this, "A well-intentioned fool carrying his bag of errors, blind to the dangers around him, but protected by an unseen force." And I just relate to this character so much. My whole music career, I was stepping off cliff after cliff after cliff, and remarkably, I'm still alive. So I feel like I was protected by an unseen force. So just some quotes you might have heard before. "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." And this was a big one for me, is like when I started to understand that the fool was who I am, and that's how I'd been throughout my life. This quote really struck a chord. And I felt, yes, I have wisdom. I've attained wisdom through sort of a multitude of trial and errors. "If the fool shall persist in his folly, he shall become wise." That's from William Blake. Okay, well, the last quote was from Obi-Wan Kenobi, who said, "Who is the greater fool, the fool or the fool who follows him?" All right, so awakening. Well, awakening is defined as the end of a dream, or like the opening of the eyes or the illumination of the mind. And a dream is defined as a sleeping vision, but the meaning of the word actually comes from a German word, drogmas, meaning deception, illusion, or phantasm. And so we get two definitions of awakening. There's awakening from sleep, which we do every day, and then there's awakening from deception, which occurs far less often. And this second kind is called a rude awakening, and it's defined as the surprising and unpleasant discovery that one is mistaken. So there's been many times throughout life when I realized, oh, I really got it wrong, or I was taught the wrong thing, and now I've realized it. And this is a rude awakening, and you have to be humble to really acknowledge you've been lied to. So some of the symptoms of awakening is, you've been humbled and you're now thirsty for knowledge and truth. But also you're just becoming incompatible with worldly norms. You might have a heightened awareness of good and evil. So again, when I was playing the fool, I wasn't really thinking about evil. I just thought everyone was cool and it's all love and light, and if I just be nice, then the world will be nice. But then I had a rude awakening when I started to perceive the evil at play in the world. And then, can't continue with your old ways. Old beliefs, no longer believable. Old desires expire, things that used to satisfy you now no longer satisfy you. You get this kind of 2020 vision where you can now see things a lot more clearly. And it's funny that it was called 2020 vision, right? Perfect vision. And then when 2020 came around, suddenly our vision changed. We see the world completely differently. And this idea of divine unrest as well, which is when you get to a point in life where you're just kind of unsettled. You're like, what do I do with this new knowledge? I need to do something now with this new perspective. And this idea of repentance, which is really just, if you've been going in the wrong direction, stop and go the other way. And so I've observed this with lots of people write to me now about their awakenings, and these are some of the common factors for people from all different disciplines. Eventually, the fear of inaction overcomes the fear of action. So I was afraid to speak my mind because I knew my views were controversial. I knew I would get ridiculed and called all kinds of names and stuff. But eventually, the fear of not speaking my mind overcame the fear of speaking my mind, and I thought I'll do it as a book. So, so with deception, we got fifth generation warfare, okay, which is a war of information and perception. This is the kind of war we're in now. It's like we're being constantly subjected to psychological operations, like every day. And they're trying to manipulate us. The mind is the battlefield. So you might have heard of silent weapons for quiet wars, or what they call non-kinetic military action. So this is wars that are fought without bombs and bullets, with silent weapons, things like psychological operations, or even things like drugs and vaccines. Now, government intelligence is basically spying, okay? Intelligence means looking out to the world and seeing what's true, gathering data, or what we call spy ops. But there's something else called counterintelligence, which is psyops. And counterintelligence, I never even heard that word until probably 2020. And it's quite surprising because we have a counterintelligence department in our government. It's called MI5 and MI6. So counterintelligence is this crazy thing where you're basically spreading lies in order to stop other people getting intelligence on you. And so if you're a government or an organization, a corporation, this is huge business. I mean, we're talking like black budget. We'll never know how much money they spend on counterintelligence. It's like a bottomless budget for media, news, TV, everything. They can spread lies to keep us, the public, from finding out what they're really doing. And it's a case of acquiring truth is intelligence, spreading lies is counterintelligence. And this is why we have so much misinformation and confusion in the world today. It's like poisoning the well of knowledge. So counterintelligence is big business, and we now have this kingdom of lies, which a lot of people are bought into 100%. They believe everything on the TV, and it's all lies built on top of lies. And when I look back to where this all kind of came from in history, there was a Jesuit program around the 17th century called Learning Against Learning. And they developed this kind of curriculum that we get at school now, specifically designed so that we're learning, but it's kind of taken us away from learning the good stuff, like the really good stuff. So a lot of what we learn is just there to just keep our minds busy and keep us distracted from the real good knowledge. Now, I usually talk about humility because alchemists always emphasize the importance of humility to walk this path. Humility is the opposite of pride. It's considered a virtue, whereas pride would be considered a vice or a sin. And it's essential to receiving higher truth. In fact, they say it's essential for healing and prayer. You can't even really hope to pray successfully or heal successfully unless you can humble yourself. So humility puts truth before ego, and pride puts ego before truth. My supervisor in my PhD, he told me there was a conference in the 1980s where there was this old professor who had a new model of the atomic nucleus. And we'd go to all the conferences and present his model, and everybody knew who he was. He was very popular. Anyway, this one year, a young postdoc got up on stage and completely debunked the professor's theory, just like humiliated him, like just proved that it could never work, that it was logically impossible and, just plain wrong. And the professor just got up from his seat, walked up onto the stage and shook his hand and said, "Thank you, now I know the truth." And I remember that more than anything else from those 4 years of PhD. It's just like stuck with me forever. And it's just the importance of being humble and recognizing we're all trying to seek the truth. And we're looking for truth together. And if someone beats you to it and someone shows you you're wrong, you should be grateful that they showed you that you were wrong. Not attack them. If the professor was full of pride, he would be kicking and screaming and demanding that the guy off the stage and lose his PhD and all this kind of stuff. Humility, very important for walking this path. Another thing the alchemists would talk about is coincidentia oppositorum, which is this coincidence of opposites. And this is kind of like a mental training exercise where you hold two contradictory ideas in your mind without crumbling, so the two opposing contradictory arguments, holding them both in your mind at the same time without crumbling or getting angry or upset. So like fire and ice, dark and light, or flat and round. What you find is that these apparent contradictions are not actually separate. If you hold them in your mind long enough, you'll start to perceive like a third way, which is like really shows that they're just both sides of another unified whole. So this is a kind of mental weight training and an essential skill for truth-seeking. So, as you know, my book is in two halves. First half is about science and debunking modern science specifically. And then the second part is about alchemy. So I'm going to talk about science now. I'm going to talk mainly about quantum theory and relativity, because that was my special subject. But before I do, there's two great myths in science that I've observed in all my years looking into this stuff. So one is the myth of scientific consensus. And this is the idea that everything you've been taught was checked, verified, tested, and agreed upon long ago by an infallible committee of geniuses that you have no cause to question. We're all kind of taught like this. So the other one is the myth of scientific progress. And this is the idea that the ancients were primitive brutes. And advancements in our theoretical understanding of reality have led to progress in technology, medicine, and society. And we owe our whole modern lifestyle to a few genius men who developed revolutionary ideas of nature, such as Newton, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, and Pasteur, etc. So these two myths are heavily programmed in. Now, I'm not saying there hasn't been technological progress. Absolutely, of course, there has been technological progress. But once I started to understand alchemy, I realized that technological progress has come from actually people working with their hands and doing stuff. It's not come from the scientific theories. You see, the two are existing in different sort of layers of the mind, if you like. The people who actually work with their hands and do real work and engineering, they work with their hands, things get better and better over time. Things get faster, more efficient, the machines get better. It's actually not because of advances in scientific theories that happens. It's because of advances in the way that people work. So when I started to look at science, I thought, actually, science hasn't progressed. It seemed like it was better long ago than it is now. Okay, so it's conventionally split into two types, right? We've got pure and applied. So pure is theoretical, speculative, and mental. That's what I was doing. I was sitting just working out equations, trees of the mind, as I called it, arboris mentis, just working out equations, developing models, and running computer simulations. And there's loads of people do that as science, right? They never actually do any real experiments. It's all just mental and on the computer. And then there's applied science, which is practical, empirical, physical. And they call that positive science. It's called positive science because it produces something. At the end, it fixes a problem. It creates value in the real world. And I'm not here to talk anything bad about positive science, because what works, works. And, nothing changes that. But negative science consumes energy. I mean, this is human resources, brain power, computing power, people calculating, on the hope of discovering something. But where's it all leading? Millions of minds and billions of gigaflops of computing power expended on fruitless theoretical calculations every year. And in fact, Nikola Tesla said it. He said, "Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation until they build a structure which has no relation to reality." And, he said that a long time ago, and it's still true today. All right, so for a little joke then, you hear the one about the physicist who developed a theory to predict the outcome of horse races. All right. Well, it worked 100% of the time, but only when applied to spherical horses in a vacuum. All right, if anyone didn't get that, I'm sure you all did get it, but it's a good joke because it cuts right to the Achilles heel of modern physics, which is that almost everything in modern physics is a sphere in a vacuum. And there's a reason for this. It's because a sphere in a vacuum is the simplest mathematical model that you can create. I mean, it's literally just a circle or a dot on the blackboard. That's it. The vacuum is nothingness, like void, and the sphere is just the dot. So they always start with putting a dot on the blackboard, and that's the most simplest mathematical model you can do. And so now physics, the whole field of physics, is completely populated with spheres in a vacuum. For example, in quantum theory, we have unimaginably small spherical horses in a vacuum. And in general relativity, we have unimaginably large spherical horses in a vacuum on a trampoline, right? As, the old space-time continuum there, yeah. So I was taught that these are the two great pillars of modern physics, that they represent the microcosm, the very large, the physics of the very large and the physics of the very small, and that they're a product of unparalleled intellectual genius, like a thing of beauty beyond any criticism or comparison. Extremely successful, but diabolically hard to comprehend. The greatest intellectual achievement of the human mind ever, and superseded classical Aristotelian physics and led to the wonders of the modern world. Now, there's a quote from Roger Penrose here. He said, "Quantum mechanics and relativity are both incredibly successful in their own domains, but they are deeply incompatible. This suggests that there is something missing in our understanding of the universe." And I say, well, there's something missing, all right, Roger. God, the human soul, the spirit, love, to name a few things, right? These are all missing. I mean, they're basically, all these calculations are based on spheres moving around in hypothetical vacuum. Hypothetical spheres in a hypothetical vacuum. It's all based on that. So it's no surprise that it can't explain everything, right? So some of the criticisms of quantum physics are things like it's lacking real-world applications, its over-reliance on Debunking experiments, they're called, which are thought experiments. I learned about lots of experiments in quantum physics, and then later found out that the experiment was never done. It was just done in someone's head. They're called Debunking experiments, right? It's too open for interpretation. It's like an incomplete theory. It's unintuitive and kind of indecipherable. It also relies on spooky magical action at a distance, which is this idea that one sphere in a vacuum can influence another sphere in a vacuum way over there without doing anything, but just spooky, just somehow affecting things really far away. Actually, the theory of gravity is based on this idea as well. Something called the measurement problem in quantum physics as well, which is when you measure a quantum system, the act of measuring it stops it from being quantum, so it's now no longer quantum. So it's like you can't actually measure quantum stuff. And it says that the universe is random, that everything that's happening now is just a result of the random bumping of these spherical horses in a vacuum. Decoherence, again, it's like the measurement problem, basically. The quantum behavior disappears as soon as you try to observe it. And then there's something called the double slit experiment, which is a cornerstone of quantum theory. But actually, this doesn't prove wave-particle duality. I'm not going to have time to go into all this today, but I do have some videos coming out in the near future where I will go deep into debunking quantum physics. So Einstein's Brownian motion was said to have proven the existence of atoms in 1905. But what you find is he didn't prove it at all. He just developed a theory. Essentially, his theory was that the reason why things wiggle when you look at them under a microscope is because they're made of atoms, and atoms cause things to wiggle. So if you see something wiggling, it must be due to the atoms, right? That was essentially the logic. It's a circular logic, basically. It's a logical fallacy. But we're told that that's how everyone knows atoms exist, because Einstein came up with a theory in 1905. I started looking into it. I'm like, well, how do we know atoms exist today? I'm in communication with emeritus professors of physics and stuff like that. And they can't even give me a reason how they can prove the electron exists. And they've been working on it their whole lives, modeling this stuff, but they have no proof that any of it exists. There's also quantum computing, right, which we're always told, coming over the horizon, there's these quantum computers, they're going to be able to crack all the codes and, hack all your passwords and steal all your money just with a single press of the return key, the most powerful computers ever. But it's pure vaporware, right? It's vaporware is technology that's always on the horizon but never materializes. They were talking about quantum computing in 1996. It's almost 30 years later, nothing has happened. There's no quantum computers. It's just a black box. It doesn't do anything. It's like an ultimate power that they're pretending that they're working on, but it's completely based on false principles. There'll be no quantum computers. Powerful computers, yes, but quantum computers, no. And one of the things is that quantum mechanics kind of leads to this kind of phony hedonistic spirituality, right? Because there's this sort of spirituality to it in a way because it's so kind of fuzzy. It's a theory of the atoms, but the way it describes the atoms, they're 99.9% empty space. So it's kind of this spiritual idea of matter. But it actually leads people to, if you believe in it, it leads in this kind of phony hedonistic spirituality, which you could call the New Age movement, basically, which the New Age movement was big on quantum theory. But this is not the first time this has happened. So atomism, the belief that everything is made from atoms, goes way back to the ancient Greece. The idea that everything is reducible to atoms in a void is attributed to four ancient figures. So that's Leucippus, Democritus, Epicurus, and Lucretius. Now, it may be that Leucippus and Democritus didn't even exist because there are no surviving writings of theirs, but we're told by, later in history by the Romans, we're told that Democritus was the father of atomism, and he was a student of Leucippus. But then there's Epicurus, and this led to Epicureanism. And I'll talk about this in a second. Epicureanism was like the ancient New Age movement. So this idea of atoms was based on four core belief systems, right? Determinism. Motion and interaction of atoms are governed by natural laws, not by divine intervention. Okay, so this is the idea that there's no living God. So they didn't want the idea that God could actually influence the world in any way. So this is called determinism, right? So God can't change anything that's going on in the world, not even the movement of an atom. Right? And then materialism. So everything, including the soul and the mind, is made of atoms and disintegrates after death. So this is the idea there's no eternal soul, no afterlife, and no judgment. Then hedonism. This is the idea that life is about the pursuit of pleasure, happiness, and the elimination of fear. So this is the idea that there's no sin, no consequences for your actions, and no moral duty. And then ultimately nihilism. This is the idea that phenomena are said to arise from the random motion and interaction of atoms. So there's no purpose, no meaning, or no guiding light in the universe. So theories come from philosophies, and it's important to understand this, that the theory of the atom is rooted in these philosophies. And this is why it leads to phony hedonistic spirituality. So Aristotle was opposed to atomism, and he had some good points on it. He said that matter is continuous, right? So the atomists are saying that there's a smallest piece, right? If you break something, you break it again, break it again, break it again, all the way down. Eventually you get down to the smallest piece, and that's the atom. But Aristotle said there is no smallest piece, right? It's infinitely divisible. Matter is a fractal. And we know this now, that matter is a fractal. You can look at it at any scale of magnification, it pretty much looks the same, right? Like a big rock looks the same as a small rock, right? It looks the same as a microscopic rock. The Earth looks the same at all different scales of magnification. There's actually no evidence that you can reduce it down to the smallest piece. Also, he said there's no void. There's no vacuum. We maybe all used to believe in the vacuum of space, but Aristotle was like, well, there is no vacuum. Nature always fills a vacuum. He also said that qualitative is better than quantitative when it comes to science. So he advocated for that it was better to focus on elemental qualities than atomic quantities. So, for example, they turn this around where, they tell us now that, the color red, for example, is not a real thing in the world. It's just an illusion in your mind created by the quantity of frequency that's going in your eye, creates the color red in your mind. This is where we've come with science now. It's all about quantitative science instead of qualitative science. But as we get to alchemy, it's more qualitative. He was also believed in teleology, which is that everything has a purpose, actually has a final cause for existing. Like things have a reason for coming into existence to achieve some purpose. Things don't just emerge randomly for no reason. And finally, what he called hylomorphism, which is the objects consist of matter, hyla, and form, morph. Not atoms or molecules, right? So you have your substance, in this case metal, and then you have your form. See, substance and form, substance and form. And that is a perfectly sufficient way to describe matter. It's not helpful to talk about atoms and molecules. And I fully agree. So, the Venetian conspiracy. Now, this is a talk on YouTube by a guy called Webster Tarpley. I'm just going to quote a few of his bits here because it's a really good talk. We're coming forward now to the 17th century. So you have to understand that Aristotle's view of physics was the standard view the world over for about 2,000 years. People understood science in terms of fire, earth, air, and water, and ether. And it was in the 17th century that atomism was revived. The ancient atomism from 400 BC was revived by the Romans in the 17th century. Now, the Roman Empire and the Venetian oligarchy moved its base of operations from Venice to London between 1200 and 1600 AD and became the British Empire. I didn't know that, but there's this civis Romanus sum. Every Briton is now a citizen of the new Rome. And that was Lord Palmerston in the 1800s. So we're all Romans. I didn't know that. So these Venetians, they sought to control what people think. They were, particularly in regards to science and philosophy, they wanted to control how the masses would respond to world events. So they fervently believed that the human being has no living soul, no immaterial substance, and no creative mental powers, and is thus incapable of forming hypotheses or making real scientific discoveries. So you see these same philosophies again: no soul, No immaterial substance, everything's just material. He said, the Venetian party are implacably hostile to scientific discovery. Since the days of Aristotle, they have attempted to suffocate scientific discovery by using formalism and the fetishism of professional authoritative opinion. So this is formalism, right, is like the excessive use of equations and analysis and numbers and all that, which is, just like my education. And then this fetishism of professional opinion, this is, the appeal to authority fallacy, right? This is how you worship Einstein. Like everybody worships Einstein. Well, if Einstein said it, it must be true, right? It's like this kind of fetishism for authority figures. Then throughout the 15 and 1600s, they actually changed their image. Instead of being the enemies of science, they became the embodiment of the most advanced and sophisticated science, which was this mathematical, hypotheses, number and measure, cold, rational materialism, absent of soul, spirit, and creator. And this is the kind of science that we get taught in school today. And he said the Venetian party has also, over the years, created a series of scientific frauds and hoaxes, bogus shams that have been elevated to the status of incontrovertible and unchallengeable authorities. All right, so what are those? Okay, so you've seen this image before, and you've seen this image in my book. I put it in my book. So this is my attempt to explain how all these modern theories hang together. So we have the Tower of Babel here, and the different layers. Now, all these theories, atomism, heliocentrism, gravity, evolution, germ theory, and then that's vaccines and superbugs and all that, they're all built on top of one another. They're all rooted in atomism, this ancient atomism, this sort of nihilistic, deterministic, materialistic, hedonistic belief system. So the model of the solar system, which is the heliocentrism, the idea that we're all spinning around the sun on this giant ball, this is actually just like the model of the atom. You see the two are almost identical. The atom has a nucleus at the center with the electrons going around, and the solar system has the sun at the center with the planets going around. The sun is said to be a nuclear fireball. So the sun is like a nucleus. But this theory had nothing to kind of hold it together. What holds all the planets and the stars in the sky? Well, for this they needed a force. And this was Newton's theory of gravity. And gravity is said to be a force created from the mass of things, actually specifically from the mass of the nucleus. So gravity is a force generated by the atoms, by the nucleus. Okay, it's you don't think of gravity as an atomic theory, but it is. It's completely rooted in atomism. Then we've got evolutionary theory. So this goes up through the ages, by the way. So we're talking I think it's 15th, 16th, 17th century, 18th century evolution, 19th century germ theory. We're going up about 100 years of time here. Evolution is rooted in atomism as well. It's not just about humans evolving from apes. It's about everything having evolved from the atoms. Right, because they tell us the atoms were created at the Big Bang, and then through the random bumping of all those little spherical horses, it created all the things that we see in the universe today. And then the germ theory, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with after the last 4 years. This is the idea that disease is made from atoms. There are atoms of disease called viruses that have just evolved out of the evolutionary theory purely to cause suffering to people and nothing else. So germ theory is an atomic theory of disease. So these are all connected and kind of built on top of one another. And in Mark Gober's book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos, he referred to my book and he called this Young's Framework of Social Engineering. So I didn't actually call it that, but another author called it that. So now I have my own framework of social engineering. Yeah. It's not something I planned to have, but yeah, there you go. So, has anyone in this room been down the flat Earth rabbit hole? All right, a few. Yeah, some people might walk out at this point. My last talk, like one person walked out. Yeah, so if you haven't, been down this rabbit hole, I'm just going to explain it to you as, the typical journey that you go through becoming a flat earther, right? So a flat earther is really one who tried to prove the globe and failed. That's all. It's like literally, we're like, I got to prove that this globe exists. And you try and you try and you try, and then eventually you admit you can't do it, and then you can no longer justify believing in the globe because you're unable to prove it. And that's essentially what happens. But there's a sort of line of inquiry that you go through on the way. It usually starts with the moon landing hoax. Right? It's, people usually figure that out pretty quick. The moon landing was a hoax. I learned about the moon landing hoax when I was a teenager, and it made sense. I thought, yeah, definitely, it looks fake. They faked the moon, yada, yada. But I thought everything else NASA had done since then was legit, like, going to Mars and, the Hubble Space Telescope and the probes and the Voyager probes and all this. Like, I thought, that's all fine, but... Okay, so... moon landing hoax, and then you start learning about other NASA lies, like faking the International Space Station and doing like the vomit comet and filming things underwater instead of outer space and all this kind of stuff. And in the space station with their big hair, like floating around with all the wires all over the wall and stuff. Yeah, they cut it out every so often, like every 40 seconds or something. They change the camera because they have to go back up in the airplane again to do the zero gravity and things. And then, of course, there's the fact that there's no photos of the globe Earth, right? You've seen the globe Earth, you've seen the globes in the classroom and stuff, but when you actually start looking into it, you realize none of them are photographs. There's actually no photographs of the globe Earth. Like, they're all images that were constructed from data or using CGI and things like this. And then, the next thing is, surely then the horizon must curve. When you go up, if you go up in an airplane high enough, you're going to see the horizon curve. It's like, nope, always flat. And there's amateur rockets which have gone up to 120,000 feet. 360 degrees is as flat as you can imagine. And the Earth is white, by the way, because when you get that far up above the atmosphere, all the layers of the atmosphere, you look down, it just looks white. So it's like completely flat and white, 120,000 feet. There's things like the Antarctic Treaty, which was in like 59, where all these countries got together and signed something to not let anybody go to Antarctica for some reason. It's like 48 countries all signed something to protect Antarctica and not let people go there. And that's pretty strange. Then there's Gleason's map. I'll come to that on the next slide, which is this new standard map of the world, which was made in 1897 and used very successfully for navigation for a long time. I mean, ever since, really. And it's this flat map of the world, and it's really good. It's a really good map. Then there's things like the flight paths and the mechanics of flight. The fact that airplanes don't actually have to dip their nose to go around the ball, but they just go in a straight line, completely level with the ground towards the flat horizon. And there's some weird flight paths, for example, from South Africa to Chile, which if you look on the globe, it looks like not that bad. You think you could just fly, maybe it's like 6 hours, 7 hours on a plane from South Africa to South America. But if you go and look it up, was the fastest flight from South Africa to South America 25 hours. It stops in Western Africa and Brazil. And I'll show you why that is. But I mean, that alone tells you that we're not on a globe. So then the whole sea level thing, zoom lenses. So now there's these high-powered zoom lenses, and we've seen that when we think the boats are going over the horizon, they're not actually going over the horizon. They're just going out of your angular resolution. But you can bring them back into view with high-powered zoom lenses, even though they appear to have gone over the horizon. And this shows that they're actually still on the same level as you, but just beyond the angular resolution. Then you realize there's no proof that you're actually spinning, because spinning is a very extreme state that creates all these forces, like centrifugal force and this kind of thing, and none of that's measurable. The Earth feels completely stationary. And even Einstein said there's no way to prove that the Earth is moving. And this was a big part of his relativity theory, because it's through relativity theory is the reason why we believe we are moving, even when there's no evidence. Okay, so then you realize you can't have air pressure next to a vacuum. So we have a pressurized atmosphere. It's like 14.7 pounds per square inch, the air pressure. And we're told that it's just completely open to the infinite, vacuum of outer space. And then basic physics tells us that if that was the case, the air would just get sucked out into space, like instantly, because air needs to be contained. It needs to have a barrier to keep it compressed. We're talking about the infinite vacuum of outer space. It would just suck the atmosphere right off into space. Then there's the idea that gravity is just a theory. We were taught it was a fact. But there's no force of gravity. It's actually just an equation that Newton made up. It's an idea, but just because he wrote an equation for a force doesn't mean that the force exists in nature. This is an example of the reification fallacy. This is when you take something abstract and you believe it to be something concrete. And gravity is actually an abstract mathematical theory based on spooky magical action at a distance, and people believe it to be a concrete agent in the world, but it's just not. There's no such thing as gravity. Then you start to realize heliocentrism is actually Roman sun worship. So the idea that we're all revolving around the sun is heliocentrism. Helios is the god of the sun. So it's kind of a revived kind of heliocentrism, because the old heliocentrism, way before, they saw Helios as riding through the sky in a chariot, right? The sun god was riding through the sky in a horse-drawn chariot. But now they view Helios as a nuclear fireball, right? And we're all orbiting around it. But heliocentrism is Roman sun worship. Then there's things in the first page of the Bible, it says that the earth is basically stationary and has a firmament or a dome over the top of it. And it makes sense. If I was going to build a world, I would build one with a roof, right? One that's actually contained, that's protected and safe and stuff. So the idea of a biblical firmament actually makes sense, and that would be why we have air pressure and things. Then you realize it's not just the Bible, but all ancient wisdom and holy books say that the earth is stationary with a container over it, right? It's it's not just the Bible. So this idea that the earth is not only not spinning, but it's actually immovable. And this kind of leads you if you're starting out, the rabbit up here, you're basically an atheist because you've been indoctrinated with science. Then you're starting to come to the belief that the creation must exist, or a creator must exist. And then when you get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, you realize, well, the Bible is actually a book of science. And at this point, you're a full scientism heretic, right? You're never going to get a job in science ever again, and everyone's going to make fun of you. Now, I know with flat earthers, not everyone is into the Bible. There's biblical flat earthers and non-biblical flat earthers. But, the fact is the Bible actually does describe very precisely the realm and how it works, and people have built models based just on the Bible using no modern science and showing, that everything works as it should. So a lot of stuff in the Bible, we think of it as religion, but when you actually break it down, it's science. It's the science of consciousness, the science of the realm. So I went through that whole sort of journey about 9 years ago. And I thought, I can't let this be known in public, or I'll get absolutely humiliated. But then after 5-6 years of holding on to it, I'm you know what, I've got to talk about this. So the flat map I was telling you about is called the azimuthal equidistant map. You've probably seen this before. In this one here, you have the Antarctica, you see, is actually around the outside. It's basically a container for the water. Around the outside of the Earth. And then you've got the Oriental or the East up there, and then the Occidental or the West there. And you'll notice that the Arctic North land is excluded. So there's just basically a big hole at the center where the North Pole used to be. Some of you will probably remember on the old maps there was land at the North Pole, but now in all the new maps there's nothing at all. In fact, if you look at a modern map, if you go north from Scotland, keep going north, where are you gonna go? It doesn't go anywhere. Literally, it just goes to the end of the map. There's nothing at all. They've completely deleted the North Pole from modern maps. So, I wonder what would happen if you left the north of Scotland and just sailed due north, just keep on going. Where are you going to go? Because the maps say there's nothing at all there. Now, but this map is used by the UN as their logo, and the WHO and various other sinister organizations. In the UN logo, again, the Arctic North is excluded. There's a hole at the center. And then Antarctica is actually excluded as well. So Antarctica has been replaced by olive wreaths, which, as I understand it, represent like the elite, essentially, or so that's quite interesting. They've just taken Antarctica off the map completely there. So, and then they divide it up into 33 segments. So that grid you see there is 33 segments of the Earth. And inside the UN headquarters and stuff, they have this map like on the walls and stuff like that. I sort of think if it's good enough for them, there must be something to it. So what is Earth? Okay, well, it comes from the Germanic word eartho, meaning ground, soil, or land surface. And the word planet comes from the Greek planetos, meaning wandering star. Okay, so a star is a persistent point of light in the night sky. In Egyptian, it's the same word for star as the word for door. So they actually believed the stars were like doorways or portals where light was shining through. Now, this view of the sun and the planets, all going through the galaxy together, you've seen this kind of thing. This is not happening. Like, this is totally not happening. At the same time, this idea of like a flat pancake, like floating in outer space, nobody believes that. Like, flat earthers don't even believe that. That's something that's used to discredit flat earthers. But nobody believes in a flat pancake floating around the sun. But Earth is not a planet. It's not a star. It's not a location. Earth is not a place. We sort of talk about Earth as the place we live, but Earth is not a place. Like, Earth is everywhere, right? It's like planet Earth does not exist. That's what I was trying to say. Just take my top off here. So, because a planet means a wandering star, and a star is a light in the sky, and Earth is not a light in the sky, and it's not wandering, right? Earth is, it's not where we are, it's what we are, right? Earth is actually what we are made of. Earth is our flesh and bone, it's our skin. We are the earth. It's the ground, the soil, the dirt beneath our feet. It's stationary by default. Earth doesn't move unless we move it. It's cold and dry. It's the element of greatest darkness, okay? So when we talk about the elements, fire, earth, air, and water, earth is the one of greatest darkness because the light can't penetrate into the earth. The light will penetrate through the air, the light will penetrate through the water, but the light can't penetrate into the earth, so the earth is very dark. Has a negative electric charge. So earth is a source of magnetism. It's a source of wood, food, and medicine. And, it's an anagram of heart and the art. And it's the divine mother principle, as in the opposite of Father Sky, right? Mother Earth. And it's our physical material body. We are the earth. We are made from earth. It's not some light flying around in the sky. Now, okay, just to finish up on the science stuff then. So I came up with a new word. So the current longest word in the English language, does anyone know what it is? Yeah. Oh, maybe, yeah, I don't know, that's a new one to me. Yeah, anti-disestablishmentarianism is typically the one. It's 28 letters and 12 syllables. And I always remember this, my granddad used to test me on spelling. Every time I went and see him, he'd be like, how do you spell, Mississippi and anti-disestablishmentarianism and stuff. And one day I asked him, what does it mean? I was like, what does that word mean? He was like, oh, nothing. It's just a bunch of bits of words all stuck together. I'm like, all right, okay. And then I learned recently that it does actually mean something. It was the movement or ideology opposed to the disestablishment of the church, right? Because the sort of secular, when the church and state were separated, like people who were opposed to the separation of church and state were called anti-disestablishmentarians. So that's kind of where it came from, opposition to church and state. So I was inspired by that, and I came up with a new candidate for the longest word in the English language, and it's anti-heliocentric atomic materialism. That's 33 letters and 15 syllables, and it's the movement or ideology opposed to the heliocentric and atomic materialist worldview. So if you know how I can get that added to the dictionary, please let me know. All right, so a materialist is one who denies the existence of spiritual substances, according to the King's English Dictionary. Okay, so let's get on to alchemy now. I'll just take a little drink to wet my whistle. Is there any questions on that? That's all right.
Right, it was just that you were saying like the long term, I've heard that before, the long term people have said that to me, that most of history people have believed the earth was round. That's what some people have said to me. So with that, you're saying that's to do with the sort of the Roman sun worship then? That was to do with, or not just the Roman sun worship? But
yeah, there wasn't a consensus on it. Like when you start looking into it, you find people have been arguing about, cosmology for, hundreds of years. But when we go to school, we're taught there's a consensus, right? That everyone now knows we believe we live on a spinning ball and that kind of thing. But it goes back to Copernicus and Newton, right, with the heliocentric theory and the theory of gravitation. And then we called it heliocentrism. But there was another form of heliocentrism way back, like a few thousand years before, where Helios, they had a completely different conception of the sun as this kind of god, like cruising around over the flat Earth on a horse-drawn carriage. And they still had another type of heliocentrism in those days, So I'm just saying it's a recurring philosophy, this idea that we worship the sun or we all revolve around the sun, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, I'll carry on with alchemy then. So why did I get into alchemy? Really from dissatisfaction with the modern scientific worldview, seeking scientific answers to spiritual questions, researching the untold history of science, understanding the origins of chemistry. That's when I first heard about alchemy, was in chemistry class, right? I was told that's where chemistry came from. Then I was swiftly told that the alchemists were just a bunch of madmen trying to make gold, and the only good thing they did was invent chemistry. There's appreciation of alchemical artworks and literature. So if you look at this, for example, have you ever seen a modern scientist make anything like that? Absolutely stunning image, artwork, full of scientific and spiritual knowledge and wisdom, So I was really drawn to the alchemists because they seem to be scientists and men of God and brilliant artists all together, all in one, whereas in this modern age, you're either one or the other, right? So appreciation of alchemical artworks and literature, seeking fundamental understanding of reality, trying to understand natural medicine and shamanic healing. So I'd had these shamanic experiences with ayahuasca where you take this medicine and they play music and you go in and see these amazing visions and experience profound healing, stuff that you just can't explain with modern science at all, even with quantum physics. And believe me, I tried. I'm like, there must be a science that can explain this stuff. And then you start looking into alchemy and it starts to make sense. It's also creativity. These alchemists were very creative. It's a big part of their process. And then healing and personal transformation, of course, just going through all that. I was just led to alchemy and then I discovered it's actually really applicable to everyday life. Whereas my education, all this nuclear physics and quantum physics and general relativity, I could find no application, no way I could use it in my life or help anybody or, or start up a business or anything. There's just nothing whatsoever you can do with it once you step out of university. So when I was a kid, I used to love drawing things like this all the time. All my doodles, I drew these kind of mad scientist contraption, sort of alchemical lab setups. It was something that's fascinated me from the youngest age. So there's this guy, Hermes Trismegistus. Now, Trismegistus means thrice great or 3 times great. And, if you want to research alchemy, then that name is a good place to start. Just search Hermes Trismegistus and read what you can, because he is said to be like a perennial wisdom teacher. So if you like a spiritual being that incarnates at different points in history under different names and identities in order to bring wisdom to the world. And he's known particularly for the Emerald Tablet and the Corpus Hermeticum. The Emerald Tablet is like a single tablet with just a short body of text on it, which is said to contain all the secrets of alchemy. And it's been translated into English by many different alchemists and authors over the years. You can look it up and read the different translations of it. It's just, it's not very long at all, and it's really, really high wisdom. So Hermes is said to be related or possibly the same being as like Egyptian Thoth or the Roman god Mercury or the Greek god Hermes. Some kind of like syncretic like combination of them, or perhaps the same guy or same being incarnating at different times in history. He's said to have achieved mastery on all 3 levels of the work. So alchemy is also known as the work, like capital the work. And it's got 3 levels, which is theoretical, practical, and philosophical. So he is said to have mastered all those, and this is how he was able to teach people so well. Now, the alchemist, like the smith and the potter before him, is a master of fire. It is with fire that he controls the passage of matter from one state to another. So alchemy is the science of transformation. It's like how the elements can be transformed into new things, and this is done by the careful application of fire. Now, alchemists were respected, feared, or revered in many cultures for possessing knowledge of divine origin. They could harness the power of fire, they could forge tools and weapons, transforming and purifying precious metals, fabricating and inventing appliances, making medicine and healing, and writing songs, music, and prayers. And they're basically an essential founding member of any town and city. Like if you were starting a town or city, you could not get anywhere without someone like this. The alchemist takes up and perfects the work of nature, while at the same time working to make himself. So there's also this idea in alchemy that as you do your work, whatever it is, music, sculpture, chemistry, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it with knowledge of alchemy, then you're transforming yourself in the process of doing your work. Like the work is inseparable from you. It's like you and the work are one, and as you transform your materials, your own soul is undergoing transformation in the process. And here's just some old paintings that I quite like, just showing alchemists like sitting doing their thing in their labs. That's quite a famous one there, The Alchemist by Joseph Wright of Derby, 1771. Absolutely amazing painting. That's said to represent the discovery of phosphorus, which they discovered by distilling vast quantities of urine. So, and there's this one as well. So this one shows, it's called The Alchemist, and this basically shows the image of alchemists that they want you to believe, right? This is this kind of, the room is horrible, right? He's sat there, he's puffing away at the fire, trying to make gold, trying to make his fire hotter so that he can make the gold, right? But his room is a complete mess. Like there's no symmetry, nothing is tidy. His wife and child are sat in the dark there in squalor. It's a complete mess. And this is kind of what they want you to think alchemists were like. They were just these desperate men who just wanted to get rich quickly and were just trying to make gold any way they could. But when you start reading the words of alchemists, you realize that's not what it was about at all. Actually, this one from 1595, the Alchemist's Laboratory, or the Amphitheater of Eternal Wisdom, as it's called. This is one of my favorite depictions of an alchemy lab. And there's a lot in here. But, I mean, if you look, for example, at the green, okay, so there's 4 green areas. We've got the tent there on the left, and then across you've got the curtains. That's the forge, so that's where there's like ovens and stuff for doing transformations. Then you've got the tablecloth. On the table there is green, and then if you go right back to the center of the image, you'll see there's a little green thing in the middle. That's the bed. That's basically the bedcloth. So each of the green in here is a different type of cloth, and cloth is a sacred thing that represents a collaboration between God and man, because if you like, nature produces the fibers, right? And then man or woman then spin the fibers into cloth, which then we use to cover ourselves and give ourselves style and dignity and all that kind of thing. So cloth is considered sacred. And the alchemist there, he's sitting, there's like a big wall of books, and he's got that tent there, and there's all like books in there, books of scripture and mathematics and art and stuff. And he's basically submitting himself to God, so he's trying to do the work of God, essentially. And then in the middle there, in the table, you see there's lots of musical instruments there. Music was very important to alchemists. They saw it as something which really keeps the spirits high. It's like a form of defense against bad thoughts and despair. So they have right at the very front of the image musical instruments. And then there's all kinds of other stuff on the table there, and various like substances and so on. And lots of messages written around. I mean, you could do a whole presentation on that image alone. But that's more like, I imagine, the alchemist labs. Yeah, it's very, very precise work. So it's been called the art, the work, or the science of transformation, a universal symbolic system of knowledge that explains all phenomena and eliminates all paradoxes and can be applied to any creative process. So this is one thing in science, in physics and especially, there's all these paradoxes. So it's a spiritual science, and it was practiced by all people in cultures going back to Greece, Egypt, China, and Atlantis. We've got the 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. The 3 principles: body, soul, and spirit. The 2 genders, male and female. And then the 1 ether, the source of everything, right? This is the 4-3-2-1 of alchemy. And they say everything is made from ether, not atoms. Now, I like this. This is an image from my house. Okay, that's the Tay Bridge there, the Tay rail bridge. And I like this because it just shows the 4 elements quite nicely, right? You can see the sun as the fire. It's got this orange glow. It's like illuminating the sky. And then there's the air element above it, the sort of blue sky with the white clouds. And then the water underneath there, the river. And then the earth is everything else you can see, right? The houses and the trees and the bridge and the mountains and all that. And this is another image from just further down the hill. This was a crazy sunset. It was one of the strangest sunsets we've had. But again, it just shows you can see the difference in color, especially between the elements, the fire, the air, the water, which reflects the fire, and then the earth, which is like the bridge and all the houses and stuff. Now, this is a painting I did for Ollie for his birthday. I tried to capture the essence of the elements in a painting using the symbol of the triangle, which is how they are symbolized. So air and fire are up the top there, and water and earth below. And if you take just a sort of regular picture of a sunset, for example, at a beach, you can see what's happening here. I've used like 2 or 3 colors for each element. So you have the air and fire, which are above the horizon line, and the fire is like, orange and yellow. The air is blue and white. And then below the horizon line, you've got the water, which is, dark blue and green. And then you've got the earth, which is brown and black. Okay, so the air and the fire are denoted with upward pointing triangles because they move up and they're above us. And the the earth and the water are downward pointing triangles because they move down and they're below us. You know, Aristotle said everything has a place, everything has its proper place in nature. Like the earth is below us because that's where it's meant to be. You know, you talk about gravity, for example. Well, Aristotle would say the reason why something falls is, this is earth, right? So the reason why it falls is because the earth belongs down there, right? So everything returns to where it's meant to be. Like if you pour water, it's going to go down because water always flows down and go back to the sea. But if you have air, and you let it out, it's going to go up, right? Or the heat's going to go up. So the elements have a proper place within creation. Now, there's these elemental states of being. They're like inside us. We have the elements inside us as well as outside us. Now, the fire inside of us is our willpower. Okay, it's our soul, our divine spark, our heartbeat, or our pulse. Okay, fire is not just light. Fire is vibration. It's all forms of vibration. So our pulse, our heartbeat, and all that's our fire. It's like our life force. Now, the air in us, well, it's our breath, but it's also our thoughts, our ideas, and our word. Our mental capacity is related to the air element. Then with the water, it's our emotional experience, okay? All the emotions of the body come from liquids. Blood, sweat, and tears, for example, okay? But there's many other liquids in the body, and they all have an emotional component. It's how we relate to them and experience them. And then the earth, okay, well, this is the solid, the physical. This is our bones, our teeth, our tissues. This is like the hard, dry matter. If you think about what happens when you die, well, the first thing that happens is the fire and the air leaves the body, okay? You stop breathing, and the heat leaves the body. And the body is now a corpse, which is just water and earth. And, you know, this is what happens, is the above and the below separate when you die. And it's interesting because the word die means to split in two, right? Di means to split in two. Okay, these are the various correspondences. Now, with correspondences, it's like we can understand more about what fire is and what air is by looking at all the things that it relates to. So fire is power and ignition and vibration and sparks. EMFs, like electromagnetic frequencies, are a type of fire. You know, lightning, plasma, electricity, all these things, our awareness, our anger, our passion. And fire is able to blaze trails, right? It's associated with volcanoes and deserts and dragons. So these are like associations and attributes of fire. Similarly with air, we have blue sky, the wind, the clouds, flight, birds, breath, speech, words, communications, thoughts and ideas, music, sound, the airwaves. All these things are airy correspondences. And with water, we have like rain, fog, rivers, lakes, springs, tides, waterfalls, oceans, emotions, blood, sweat, and tears, mercury, memory, fish, healing, cleansing, flowing, dissolving. There's all these like words and correspondences come out with water. And then with earth, we have the land, the sand, soil, rock, ore, stone, gems, crystals, plants, bugs, bones, teeth, money, metal, meat, minerals, magnets, medicine. Earth is firm and fixed and fractal, and it's stable and enduring. So the fire and the air are called the masculine elements, and together they represent Father Sky. So in the native traditions, Father Sky is essentially the whole sky. It's the air and the stars and the sun and the moon, all collectively together known as Father Sky. And similarly, all the water and all the earth is Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth is not just the earth, it's the earth and the water. It's everything that's below us. And so we find energy or spirit is masculine and matter or flesh is feminine. So it's always a bit weird to say this one, but in this sense, all bodies are feminine, which is, if you think about it, because they're made of earth and water, all bodies are feminine. So it's like the body is feminine energetically, and our life force is masculine. And it's the way the two interact that we get life. And there's this painting by Mark Henson, which is quite nice, showing like the as above, so below. the father sky and the mother earth, right? You see the fiery clouds above reflecting the mother earth in the water below. And, you know, when I went and did all this shamanism stuff and like Honduras and stuff like that, you know, from what I could pick up, I realized this is what they believe, right? This is like the common thread of all these different indigenous cultures. They all recognized this, whereas, you know, I never learned about any of this stuff at school. So elements make our senses, all right? We have the eyes are for the fire or the light. We have the nose, which is for sensing the air. The tongue is a water sense. Your tongue needs to be wet. You have obviously saliva to taste the water. And then touch is how we feel the earth, right? It's through the sense of touch. That's our earth sense. And then the ears are the ether. Okay, so actually the word ether is an anagram of the ear. But also the ears don't just work in the air. They work underwater, and they even work under earth. You know, if you were in a situation of being underneath the earth, your ears would actually still pick up the vibrations in the earth. So your ears are like your sort of highest, your ether sense, you know, because they can work through a whole range of octaves and in all the different elements. And then when it comes to death, we have basically 4 options. We can either go back to the fire, which is the cremation. We can go to the air, which would be desiccation or donating your body, where they dry your body out, they remove the water. And then, or you can have burial at sea, which would be going back to the water, or you can be buried in the earth, right? So, you know, there's no escaping the elements. These are the fundamental elements of reality. It's not electrons, protons, and neutrons. It's fire, earth, air, and water. So when I first started learning about alchemy, I was a musician. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, you know, even though they're talking about chemistry, it all makes sense to me as a musician. It feels like they're also talking about music through this kind of correspondence. And Carl Jung actually said, the skill and process of learning an instrument parallel the process of individuation in many ways. Therefore, when music is used as a medium for inner transformation, it becomes alchemy. And the suffering of the music maker is transmuted into inner gold. And I love this quote because, you know, it seems like a good idea to become a full-time musician. Like, you're like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to be a full-time musician. It's great when you're inspired, but when you're suffering, you're just like, you know, things are going bad. It's actually really hard to create, you know, good music when you're suffering. But that's where the alchemy comes in, when you can actually turn your own suffering into something which is, you know, really great and enjoyable for other people. Music, of course, is enhanced with chemical substances. People take, you know, in shamanism, they'll take a substance and then will play music, and the music and the drug basically interact together in your mind, and it's through that interaction of the music and the drug that the healing happens. And, you know, this is really where the whole rave culture came from. Shamanic healing uses music, medicine, and prayer. Yeah, when you get in there, and fasting. So usually you'll fast for a day or two, maybe longer. Then you'll take the medicine, and then the shaman will play music to you and pray for you all through the night. You know, and could you imagine a doctor doing that for you at the hospital? It's so different from how we practice medicine in the West. And just to quote myself, because this is from the intro of my book, I said, the dance floor is a kind of alchemical forge where music and medicine interact in the crucible of the dancer's mind. It is a spiritual shamanic experience that can be profoundly healing when it's done right. And so I started something called Audio Alchemy, where I was teaching people how to make music with an alchemical mindset, how to basically map everything in alchemy to everything in music, so people could practice music as an alchemical process. I looked at what are the 4 elements of music. How do the 4 elements correspond with music? And I found that, well, fire is the dynamics or the energy of the music. It's the life energy of the music, like how the music moves. Whereas the melody is the airy part of the music, because we communicate through the melodies. The melody is our speech, or a replacement for our speech. And then the rhythm is the earth, okay? The rhythm is the lowest, the sort of chunkiest sound, and rhythm is the earth element, and then bass is the water element, which is the emotion. So you need bass in music for it to have an emotional effect. If you take the bass out of music, it will have no effect on your emotions. Actually, from this, you can find out the three principles of music as well. What is like the body, soul, and spirit of music? Well, it turns out the body is the rhythm and the bass, which makes sense because the rhythm and the bass moves the body. You know, it causes you to move the body. The soul of music is the bass and the melody. So this is like if you buy sheet music. You know, it has a bass clef and a treble clef, right? It's like that is the soul of the song. It doesn't come with drum parts or effects or anything like that. It just has the bass and the melody. That is the soul of the song, right? You can play it any way you want, but the bass and the melody is the soul. And then the spirit of the song, well, that would be the melody and the dynamics, okay? So the melody is essentially the part of the song you would whistle, and the dynamics are the way that it changes between loud and quiet. You know, you need to have dynamics in music, otherwise it sounds like a robot or a mobile phone or something. You know, you need dynamics to add that human element. Okay, so and this image here is an old alchemical drawing from, I think, about the 1600s. It has a lot of stuff in there about music as well. One of the things I liked, I decoded this quote down the bottom there. It says, "Sacred harmony is the flight of evil spirits." So this is the idea that harmony, musical harmony, causes evil spirits to flee. And, this really got me thinking about the church bells, which have been taken down, sadly. I mean, you probably still have a lot here in Edinburgh, but back where I am, the bells used to ring when I was a kid, and now I never hear church bells ringing. A lot of them have been taken down. They were made into like bullets and stuff during the war, and apparently there was a whole conspiracy to remove church bells, but they have a harmonic tone and a harmonizing effect on towns and cities, and of course they're happening rhythmically as well. It's like every hour, bam, 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 and they believed that caused evil spirits to flee, so then that makes you think, well, what happens if you stop ringing the bells, right? Then the evil could come in. So bring back the bells. That's what I say, bring back the bells. This image here, this is in my book as well. So this is the idea of personal transformation. The idea is that even the most incontinent of men can be transformed into a sage, right? So incontinent meaning a man unable to control his lower impulses. And because we are earth, this is kind of equivalent to saying that even the roughest of rock can be transformed into a jewel. And the transformation of lead into gold is actually symbolic of the own transformation of our own soul. I mean, I believe it probably is possible to make gold from lead. I've never done it, but the key thing to understand is that when they talk about lead into gold, they're really talking about your own transformation. It's not about going and trying to get rich quick. It's about transforming your rough self. We come into this world as rough earth. We're like ore, and we need to, through our life, through our choices, we need to refine ourselves to become better people. Now, metal is made by subjecting earth to the fires of purification. Maybe with the exception of gold, which you can pretty much pull out of the ground in places, all metals are made from rock, right? They get the rock and then they put it through, step after step. There's like tons of different steps. They break it down, pulverize it, dissolve it in acid, like burn it, do all this stuff again and again and again until they end up with this fine white powder, like talcum powder, and then they melt that and then solidify it, and then you get your bar of copper or your bar of silver or whatever. So we're told that metal is extracted from the earth, but actually when you look into it, it's actually transformed from stone. It's like they take stone and they transform it using alchemy to make metal. And at the same time, we have metal, M-E-T-T-L-E, which is like our own strength and resilience of a human being. And this, again, is made by subjecting earth, us, to the fires of purification. And the fires of purification are the trials and ordeals that we go through in our lives, the challenges that we don't necessarily want to face, but they make us stronger and they increase our metal. and our resilience. Because we are the earth, and we are strengthened and purified and tempered by the trials and ordeals of life. So I found a colored version of this. It's interesting because it's actually called The Medicine to Cure Fantasy and Purging Folly with Drugs. That's the name of that painting, The Medicine to Cure Fantasy. So right here in the front there, they see a guy having his head inserted into an oven of some kind. And then out of the top in the smoke, there's all this stuff, all these images, all these like random images, like funny looking things like bugs and jesters and, lots of weird stuff. Well, that basically represents all the crap that was in his mind. He's like, we all have just all this stuff floating in our heads, like stuff we're thinking about, stuff we saw, stuff we're worrying about. But when you actually go through a proper purification of the mind, all that gets blasted away, and you come back to your core inner soul. You let go of all the impurities that are going around in your mind. And then in the back there's another alchemist, and he's pouring some liquid into a funnel, and there's a guy sitting there, and you see the guy sitting on a makeshift toilet. Underneath there's two little fools which are purging out of his backside. You see that here? Two little jesters which are coming out his back end. So this is symbolic. The liquid that he's pouring in is called sagesse, which means wisdom, or sage essence of sage, right? So he's pouring wisdom in his head, and then this folly is falling out of the bottom. So that's purging folly with drugs. Now, when we hear drugs now, we think, drugs are bad, war on drugs and all that, right? But of course, in those days, drugs were named completely differently to how they are now. They didn't have these atomic theoretical names. They were actually named after the quality of the soul that you would get from the drug, right? So all the ones on the shelf have, the top shelf drugs are called doctrine, piety, diligence, sense, virtue, reason, good spirit, subtlety, finesse, intelligence, curiosity, industry, modesty, honesty, good intention, humility, obedience. And these are the names of the drugs, the only example I could think of in modern times was ecstasy, right? Because ecstasy is actually a quality of the human soul. And people would take ecstasy, right? And you say, what is it? It's ecstasy. It's take it and you will feel ecstasy. Very simple, But that was it. The drugs were actually named after the quality of the soul that you were gonna get from it. Of course, now they call it MDMA, and no one knows what the hell that means. Yeah. Anyway, so I said I would come back to this as my final slide and just talk about the transformation of consciousness. Now, this model of consciousness is split into 3 zones, and they actually correspond with the lower dantian from Chinese medicine, which is the body, and then the middle dantian, which is the soul, and then the upper dantian, which is the spirit. And he's divided up into all these different levels, these different states of consciousness, and the corresponding view of life and view of God. So, for example, if you're in a state of deep shame, right, you could be feeling humiliation, you have a miserable view of life and a despising view of God. And then, as you go up, as you elevate your consciousness, you change, your view of life changes and your view of God changes. And when you cross over from this lower dantian, body consciousness, into the heart or the soul consciousness, this is pride, right? See, so pride is the kind of the end of level boss, right? For getting out of the body and into the soul is you can get past pride with courage, you see. And then you get into courage, you start coming into the green space, into the heart zone. And then as we get up higher again, we get to reason. So if you look at reason, for example, they say, this is where you start to have a view of life as being meaningful. So now life is meaningful. And you're starting to see that God must be wise, right? So then, but crossing over into then the spiritual, we then get to love, right? And then start to see a different view, a view of God as a loving being, which is a long way from, I wasn't always into God. I was an atheist for many years. But as my soul developed, right, it's like my relationship to life and my relationship to God changed. And I think this is just a wonderful image for understanding how that happened. And, that's really what alchemists are talking about when they mean the transformation of your soul. It's not about transforming your body. We don't actually need to transform the body because it was made in the image of God, as the alchemists believe. It's a perfect design. I mean, yes, we have to maintain it and keep it fit and refine it and stuff, but, we don't need a third arm or a third ear or things like that, right? We don't need to transform the body or augment the body. It's our soul that needs to be transformed, and then, the body will open to us more. So anyway, that's all for now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how you felt about astrology connected to alchemy, because to me there seems to be like no separation of the two, really.
Yeah. No, I love astrology. I say astrology is the true science of the stars, and alchemy is the true science of the earth, right? And they work together. It's like as above, so below. And things like astronomy and astrophysics are just a distraction from astrology, because that's why I did at university. It was astrophysics at first, then I changed to theoretical physics. But astrophysics is frightfully boring and useful. It has no application to yourself. There's nothing you can learn about yourself from it, But then as soon as you start looking into astrology, you start learning so much about yourself, really knowledge that you can apply to your relationships and your work and everything like that. So astrology is real science, astrophysics, not. Any other questions? Yeah.
What is the moon?
What is the moon? I don't know. I don't know what the moon is. I mean, I know what it's not, and it's not a giant spinning ball orbiting the Earth. But in alchemy, the sun and the moon are considered the king and queen of the sky. The sun being masculine because it radiates light, and the moon feminine because it receives light. And the way you can sort of see that is because you're able to look straight at the moon without getting blinded. Like if the moon was shining the same way the sun was, or if it was reflecting the sun's light, you wouldn't be able to look straight at it. Just like with any big light, you look at it, it's like it shines right in your eyes. But with the moon, you can look straight at it and you can see all the patterns on it. So they say that energy is going into the moon. That's why we can look at it and why it has a cold light. So you can measure the temperature of light coming from the moon is colder than the nightshade, whereas the temperature coming from the sun is hot. So the sun is hot and positive in the sense that energy is coming out of it, and then the moon is cold and negative because energy is going into it. And that's why we're able to look directly at it and not get blinded.
The moon does reflect the sun's light, though, which is why it changes shape.
It doesn't reflect the sun's light. It's got its own light, yeah.
But it does also, because that's how you get like new moons and full moons.
I know that's what we're told by science, yeah, but
It's an astrological thing as well.
I think if you look deeper into it, you'll find there are circumstances where it just doesn't work. The idea of the moon reflecting the sun's light doesn't work because you're assuming they're both balls in the sky, right? I assume, like balls.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I also think that they're energetic in their own right.
Yeah. I think it's hard to say what they are exactly, but we can just talk about their energetic qualities. But yeah, I mean, I grew up believing that the moon reflected the sunlight, but I don't believe that anymore.
How do you get full and new moons?
Well, the moon, the moon has its own thing that it does, and it appears to do it independently of the sun. That's what I'm saying. It's they both have their own independent light. Yeah. Yeah, well, another interesting thing, I noticed this just recently, if you look at a full moon and there's some clouds in the sky, you'll notice that it only illuminates the cloud in front of it. All the other clouds in the sky are not illuminated by the moon. If it was really far away, it would illuminate the whole sky, right? But the moon is surrounded by darkness. It doesn't even illuminate the sky around it. It's a white light in blackness, and it only illuminates the cloud directly in front of it. Whereas the sun illuminates the whole entire sky and causes it to glow blue. So they're different, but there's a guy called Joseph Hanvey who's made a really beautiful model of Earth based on the biblical description of what Earth is. And he's shown how all the eclipses work and everything, and it's nothing to do with the moon reflecting the sun. Yeah. Joseph Hanvey, Hanvey. He's made a really beautiful model of the realm, and everything works perfectly in it. And all he used was the description, the scientific description from the Bible. And he's able to predict the eclipses and, yeah, everything. Yeah, really cool. Any other questions? Hey, Billy. The Law of the Luminaries. Yeah, good channel. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you explain your realization of what the Earth is? You've just said what it isn't, as far as I could hear.
Well, yeah, so I try to separate the Earth, the element. That's what I'm saying. Earth is the element that we're made from. You know, it's our skin and bone, and it's the soil and the dirt and all that kind of thing. So you're talking about Earth, the realm, like the...
No. You said it's not a round planet. It's not...
Well, we don't know how far it extends because we're not allowed to explore Antarctica. So one of the biggest tests, if you wanted to really prove that the Earth was a globe, one of the best ways to do it would be to fly from South America to Australia over Antarctica. Right? Just no one's ever done that. You see, there's actually been no north-south circumnavigation. No one's ever gone north to south around the Earth, or even just over Antarctica from Australia to South America. No one's ever done that. And so, you know, some people say that, yeah, if you go south enough, you'll just come to a wall, essentially. But we don't know. I mean, we don't have evidence. Like I say, I don't know what's in the north, and I don't know what's in the south. Until we know that, I can't really tell you how far the Earth extends or anything like that. Yeah.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you, and I'm really enjoying your book. My question is about advanced civilizations that we've had. There's lots of evidence on this realm that we're actually probably the lowest down in terms of technologies and knowledge and all this alchemy as well that has been hidden from us. What's your thoughts on previous maybe resets that so...
Yeah, well, I don't know about resets, but yeah, I definitely think the ancient technology was better, and I think it's evident in the architecture. And when I start reading the books of alchemists from like 400-500 years ago, the way they write and the knowledge that they had was clearly much higher than any of the science people around today. And it just, and that's why I stopped looking to the current times for information and start looking to the past, and then that's where I got the most benefit, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering, what is your thoughts on Atlantis and the fact that there's supposed to be like a sort of sinkhole at North Pole?
Well, yeah, I don't have any hard and fast thoughts about Atlantis, but I do know some people who've been looking into that, and they believe it was the British Isles. The Atlantis is actually the British Isles. And I learned something interesting recently. You know the Isle of Man? So everything you know about the Isle of Man is a lie. Apparently, it's a total deflection. But yeah, so it's actually the Isle of Manannan, which is the Celtic name for the god of the sea, which is Neptune or Poseidon. So the Isle of Man is actually the Isle of the god of the sea, or the Neptune's island, you could call it. And apparently there's lots of stuff going on there. It's like the fairies are there. There's the home of the fairies and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like there is this whole like hidden magical kingdom here in the United Kingdom that most of us don't know about, like Harry Potter style, right? It's like, you know, just it's here with us, but most of us, we don't have access to it because we're just muggles. But yeah, I know a lot of people looking into Atlantis, and they believe this is the British Isles. It was Atlantis, yeah. Sorry, any other questions?
Is that Britain's Shattered Isles you're talking about?
Who, sorry?
Britain's Shattered Isles.
Britain's Shattered Isles.
Atlantis being part of Britain's Shattered Isles.
Oh, okay. Is that a book?
Mark Windows.
Mark Windows. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Britain's Shattered Isles. Yeah. Was there a few more at the back there?
Yeah, it kind of ties in with what you were saying there about different realms, but it's kind of something I've been exploring, is that the Earth is multidimensional as well as us. And so I was thinking about levels of consciousness that we hold would potentially have keys to experiencing the Earth as a different shape, reality, texture,
Yeah.
different beings in it, and
Yeah.
they're all coexisting, but in different levels of dimensions and reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just what your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. I mean, with the shamanic plant medicines in particular, you notice how just a small dose of a plant can completely change your perception to where now everything looks like really mystical, and you can see things that you can't see with your normal eyes, and that can be done just by ingesting a plant. So yeah, I absolutely think there's different densities and different levels. It's multidimensional. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Well, it has no shape. That's the thing. I mean, it's mountains and valleys, right? It's like a fractal. But if you mean like it could be a ball, I still don't think it could be a ball. But yeah, I mean, sure. People, you can believe it's a ball, but I don't think you can prove it. Okay. Was there one more then? I thought someone over there had a question. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's really interesting. What's the vested interest in saying that the Earth is spherical? Because I guess then a lot of effort's gone into that. So, there has been the first photo of the globe. I think it was called blue marble. I think planes fly at a certain altitude so they can follow the curvature of the Earth. And even if you say there's no photo of the Earth, there's no photo of God. But a lot of us still believe in God. So I'm just wondering what's the vested interest behind that if the Earth really is flat. And then my second question is, it's really fascinating to see all of the elements and then the, I can't remember what you termed it, correspondences with that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we could use that in our day-to-day life? Like how could that improve the way we live if we factor that into how we engage with the elements? Thank you.
Yeah, well, the vested interest in the globe, I mean, that is a tough one, right? It's like, why did they fake the moon landing? Think of the amount of effort and time and planning that must have gone into that. And then, these guys like Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin still have to maintain that lie, and they've been caught out. There's a guy called Bart Seabrill. He did a film called Something Happened on the Way to the Moon. Yeah, it's a good worth checking out. But yeah, so a huge amount of energy went into faking the moon landing, and when you really think about just that, and that was like 60 years ago or something, you realize that they are putting a lot of energy into lying to us about where we are and the nature of the world. I say they, it does appear to go back to the Romans and the Jesuits and the Venetians, as I talked about earlier. And why are they doing it? Well, I don't know, it's this learning against learning I talked about way back at the start. Like, they instituted a system of education that was to make us feel like we were constantly learning things, but we're not actually learning any of the good stuff or the true stuff, or they wanted to keep it all to themselves. Stuff like astrology and alchemy. Right? You go to university now, you learn all this science, but you learn nothing about astrology, nothing about alchemy. Well, in the old days, those were the most important sciences to learn, right? Because they apply, we can apply them to human life, to health, to all kinds of things. So the second question was, remind me? How can we use that? Well, I think it's just about recognizing the elements wherever you can, recognizing them inside yourself, and recognizing them in the world around you. When we look at things can look often very complex, but when you look at them with an elemental point of view, it becomes much simpler. Take a computer, for example. A computer is this very complex thing, right? But we know there's no water in there, and there's no air in there either. So actually the computer is earth and fire. It's just earth and fire. The fire is the electricity, and the earth is all the components. And I realized as well with software and hardware. So software is masculine, and hardware is feminine. You see, because hardware is earth, and software is commands of the mind. So software is fire and air, and hardware is earth. So just things like this, you can just start to see everything in reality as being made of fire, earth, air, and water, and as having either a masculine or feminine energetic component. So masculine and feminine is different from male and female. Male and female is regards to a living being, but masculine and feminine is a type of energy. So, you can just learn to see the elements in the world around you, and I promise you, everything will come so much more clear, and you'll understand how everything works. Even the most complex things are really easy to analyze and break down when you know that there's only fire, earth, air, and water, and nothing else. We've reduced fire. We reduced fire into photons. Right? We've reduced air into molecules, and water into molecules, and earth into all these different substances and whatnot, but it's ultimately just fire, earth, air, and water. We can have all these different names for the different substances and the different types of water and everything, but when you really get down to it, there's only 4 things that are real, and it's fire, earth, air, and water, and I think it's just very empowering, and it helps you understand science on a much deeper level. Okay, all right. Thank you all. Thank you very much.